Faster than a fraudulent performance measure, stronger than a misplaced decimal point, able to leap complex compliance requirements in a single bound. It's Super Auditor! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Auditors Save the World, one audit project at a time, where we bring you thrilling tales of daring audits and brave financial reviews. Here, our heroes don't wear capes, but they do wield the power of empirical evidence. Brought to you by the pros at Yellowbook-CPE. In each episode, we interview those legendary auditors who have truly rescued the day. Stay tuned, listeners, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your podcast app of choice. And now, here's your host, Lita Hart-Fanta.
Faster than shifting regulations. More powerful than complex compliance, able to leap tall stacks of federal guidance in a single bound. Look, in the single audit clearinghouse. It's a teacher. It's a standard setter. It's Melisa, the audit superhero, champion of federal grant auditing, defender of accountability, master of untangling the most technical topics and turning them into crystal clear lessons. By day, she shares her wisdom in classrooms and boardrooms. By night, she lends her voice to standard-setting bodies, shaping the very future of our profession, where confusion lurks, where compliance trembles, where technicality overwhelms. There you will find Melisa, bringing clarity, courage, and a cape made of technical excellence. She's here to save the audit world.
Well, anytime there's a change in administration, there's always a little bit of a delay, but this is an unusual delay. This is worse than COVID. So in 2020, obviously, we had a delay, but it came out in August. So we are at the end of September here and still no compliance supplement. And states like North Carolina, which is where I live, we have a single audit act here locally, and our audits are due October 31st, and we still don't have anything to work with. On top of that, the AICPA has been pretty clear. You can't issue an audit if you don't have a compliance supplement. So even if you think you're done, you're not, because you don't have a supplement to work from. So now we have people who are trying to issue just the financial statement audit for the bank or whatever user, and then they're holding the compliance audit. And now we're going to have to issue that with weird dating and reporting issues. And so it's a hot mess right now. The single audit world is really stressful. I thought last month, NASAC actually came out and said, like, you need to issue this supplement. Like, this is not fun. So last month, at the end of the month, the AICPA released a draft compliance supplement, but then basically said you can't rely on it. So we are struggling in this world right now of single audits, and trying to teach to something that doesn't exist in a year of major change is problematic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a rough year.
So, you know what probably would help is if you could give people a overview, because not everybody is aware of what the single audit is. I could do it or you could do it. You want to just give them a summary of it?
Sure, happy to. So when entities, and we used to say non-federal entities, but terminology actually just changed with the 2024 Uniform Guidance. But when recipients or subrecipients of federal funding receive, and it depends, 750,000 is the previous threshold, $1 million is the new threshold as of those 9/30 year ends, so the ones that are just coming up. If they receive in excess of that in federal funding, whether that's a grant, whether that's a federal loan or a federal subsidy, they're actually required to have something called a compliance audit. And a compliance audit is really important because, unlike a financial statement audit, when we're trying to determine whether there's material misstatement, in a compliance audit, we're trying to determine whether they use the money the way they were supposed to. Did they comply with the terms and conditions of the award? So we look at things like, did they buy things that were allowable? Did the money go to beneficiaries who were eligible? Did they provide the proper reporting for those federal funds? And so It's a really important role that auditors play in ensuring that we are compliant because there's trillions of dollars out there in federal funding, and we want to make sure that they're used properly, right? So whether that's airport funds or CDBG money or even Title I funds that go to schools and school districts, right? It's really important that the schools use it for the students who are supposed to be getting it, and that the right paraprofessionals are being used. And so it's a very different type of audit, and it requires a lot of specialized knowledge. So it's something that is near and dear to my heart. It's one of my favorite things to teach, but it's definitely an area where we are struggling this year with a lack of guidelines because you need to know what the federal government wants you to look at. And if you don't know what they want you to look at,
You did a
you don't know.
you did a great job explaining it, much better than I would have done. So I'm so glad you did it. And then the compliance supplement is per grant instructions on what's important to the grantor for us to look at as auditors about that grant.
Correct.
And under this new administration, do you think under the Trump administration, do you think they've changed their focus? And is that why the compliance supplement is held up? Or what do you what's the problem?
There's a couple of reasons. The first one is we are implementing the 2024 uniform guidance, which means we're going to go back to, if you remember the last time we did this, a 3.1 and a 3.2.
Right.
So if you receive money under the old uniform guidance, the auditor would follow a 3.1 guideline because that was the terms and conditions that existed at the time they received the award. And then 3.2, it had to be completely rewritten for the new terms and conditions under the 2024 uniform guidance. And so when we update the uniform guidance, which is required federally every 5 years, so we just did it in 2020. That was a big part of it. So obviously every grant has a 3.1 and a 3.2. Not everyone. There's thousands of grants, just the core ones make it into the compliance supplement. So they had to do that, but then they also had to make changes to not just the 3 section and the 4 section, but they also had changes to like the 4. So 3 is the general guidelines. Part 4 is where you get into the grant specific guidelines. And then part 5 is where you get into the clusters. And all of those sections needed to be basically done twice. So you can only imagine, we don't have a 4.1 and a 4.2, thank God. But they do have to talk about pre and post guidelines for these specific grants. And so it's a lot of update. It always is when there's a massive change. So not a surprise. And then you have a change in administration. So changes in priorities and what they're looking for. And they've issued several executive orders with respect to grants. So the new administration has a different point of view than the previous administration who did the last round of updates.
So is there anything that sticks out on your mind as like a major change over past years? Or is it just more of the same, just a slight change in terminology? Or is it like big stuff?
Well, obviously, the biggest change is the threshold. There'll be several thousand entities you no longer need a single audit. So that's a good thing, try to reduce burden. But there's also changes in like the de minimis threshold for indirect cost rates.
All
There's
right.
changes to thresholds for equipment. There's a lot of changes in the area of procurement. So there are quite a few. So they've updated procurement. They did a lot of clarifications. They did things like add veteran-owned businesses to the list of preferred vendors. They did some rewriting, clarified the micro purchase threshold language.
All right.
They've made some changes. Indian tribes are no longer required to follow the federal guidelines. They can now follow their tribal rules, similar to how states are allowed to do the same. So yeah, there was actually quite a bit of update that happened in the federal world.
Okay. Yeah. So your clients, you are teaching all the time to CPA firms who are doing this single audit. That's your bread and butter.
Yep. So bread and butter are CPA firms as well as state auditors' offices who have to do these single audits. So some of the funds are done at the state level, some are done by independent public
Right.
accounting firms.
So you started your career in public accounting.
I did. I started my career.
And then how long ago did you leave public accounting and become a teacher?
Sure. So I started my career in public accounting. I started at Deloitte, and then I actually went into industry, and then I went back to public accounting, and then I worked in national office for a CPA firm, and I was working for them full time. But I really had the teaching bug, and they were great. So I actually went part time with them and started my company teaching
Fun.
CPE, and went full time in 2020, which was obviously an interesting year to go full time in a business for teaching CPE.
Ooh,
But
yeah.
I love virtual training, so it ended up working out really well. Proper instructional design can make any class a great class. It doesn't have to be all lecture. So I've been GLS will actually turn 10 in February, February 2026. So we're really excited.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Beautiful. You guys are really taking off too because there's such a need for good instructors.
Yep, and we're big on instructional design, so it's not just talking at you, it's really how do people learn and how can you incorporate case study and application. So we really love working with clients to give them
Mhm.
case studies and workshops on how to do a single audit and work through a program and talk about internal controls and talk about compliance testing.
Well, that's beautiful. That's really needed. What do you think the dilemmas are, the hangups are for most of your clients when it comes to auditing? Let's say the single audit. Obviously, the guidance being super delayed is a huge hangup, but what else do they struggle with, you think?
Well, one of the biggest ones is not enough people. It's particularly bad because
Mm,
first off, when you're dealing in the single audit world, it's a specialty skill. So you have to have strong auditing skills, and then you add on
mm.
yet another layer, similar to like employee benefit plans where you have the DOL regulations. We're adding on a whole new level.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Yellowbook-CPE, the heroes behind the jumbo bundle of self-study courses. With a 1-year subscription, you get access to over 180 hours of top-notch CPE content. Dive into thrilling tales of agile, IT auditing, fraud, and internal controls. All courses carry NASBA's quality seal, so you know they've got the superpower of trustworthiness. Just click the link in the description to sign up. And now, back to our story.
We don't teach it in school, so they don't really know anything about it when they graduate. So you're starting from scratch when you get them. And there's just not enough firms who do it. There's actually more work than there are firms. There's states like, I think it's Wyoming, has only 2 auditors in the whole state that will do a single audit, and one's not taking any clients. So no new clients. Yeah. So there's just a shortage of people who willing to do the work. It's one of those areas, unfortunately, that is super important. You know, if you were to ask the citizens about the importance of federal funding being spent properly, they would tell you it's really important. But unfortunately, it's deemed to be sort of a compliance exercise and no one wants to pay
Sure.
for it. And so
Right.
margins aren't great. And so they can't attract new people in. And I would say that's probably, when you think about normal supply and demand, right? Demand is increasing due to all this federal funding, and supply is decreasing, but pricing isn't changing. So it's not an ideal
Mm,
situation right now. So
mm.
I would say if we could get people to appreciate the work that's being done and I'm able to charge its worth, I think more people would
Right.
do it.
Yeah, sure. Because you mentioned you'd worked for Deloitte. I did some work for them a few years ago, and they don't really focus on audits anymore as their main moneymaker because it's not a moneymaker. There's so much compliance and so much risk with that. They would rather, when they work with governments, help them comply with the grants, be on their side in management, but not do the audits. Are you seeing that in your work too?
Absolutely, and we've seen a lot of smaller firms exit, and so they can then do great support on the compliance side, on the preparation side. They're great for support, but there's just not enough auditors. And when you're talking about governments and nonprofits, right, it's a unique set of individuals who are going to
Yeah.
need this.
Yeah.
It's definitely a transition that's happening as people move away from audits because they're difficult. There's constantly changing rules. They're expensive if you have to constantly
Yeah.
be keeping up with them. It's a return on investment. I can go and get advisory work and have great margin.
Yeah, yeah. I also noticed that the firms that succeed at this are located in lower wage areas. Like, so I worked with a firm in, I think it was Minnesota. They weren't, paying their staff an awful lot, and they were bidding work all over the country, including work in New York, where they have a very high cost of living, and they were able to steal those gigs from the local New York CPAs because they could do it at almost half the cost. And that allowed them to grow their business. What do you think about that?
Well, I think we see, cost of living is obviously an important consideration for what we pay our staff. There's actually an article today that first year hiring is up significantly in terms of pay. The new hires are making a lot more than historically we have. That came out of the pipeline, where we're seeing a lot of the groups, the National Pipeline Advisory Group, or NPAG. One of the biggest things people said is they can leave college and they can make more in any other major. Why would you go into accounting where you need a fifth year and you don't get any money out of it? So I think
Yeah.
there are fee pressures that come from that. I also think that the biggest way to do a good job is to just do a lot of them. I
Right.
don't care where they're located, but the more you do, you're good at it. Like, people get
Right.
expertise in it, and understand it. You're doing 1 or 2, it's a learning curve every single time.
Yes,
You do
exactly.
10, 15 of them a year, you're starting to get it. Like, each person knows what they're looking for, and they know the federal grants, and they know the people, and they know the rules. It's, if you're doing 1 or 2, it's
Mhm.
expensive, and it's a
Right.
big uphill battle keeping the continuing education requirements, as you know, right? The Yellow Book requirements.
Right.
So I think volume is the answer, right? If you're gonna do it, do a lot of them and do them really well.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep, and that's what this firm was doing, taking them away from those onesie-twosie local firms who were charging too much. And you're right, the governments don't value the results, they just know they have to get it done. Yeah.
And it's sad because it's such an important thing. Like, I think the advisory work is important, but it makes their lives easier. Whereas compliance work doesn't make their life easier. It technically probably
Right.
makes it a little bit harder.
Sure.
But that's what protects the public, right? The whole point of a single audit is to make sure your tax dollars are spent appropriately, right? You don't want to see someone who's ineligible receiving money, or something that's egregiously purchased with federal funding, right? You really want them to be done correctly. So I think citizens probably care a whole lot more about it. And I wish we could convince citizens to make a big stink about getting a good single audit, because I think that's the only protection they have.
And they don't know what it is or why it is or how that works. No. Until there's a scandal.
Even if you don't know how it works, there are lots of CPAs who've never heard of a single audit. If
Right.
all they do is, tax work, or they do traditional financial statement audits, like, it's a niche area within the industry.
It's a niche. So what is the so you're involved with the AICPA at a standard setting level, and you obviously recognize that there's a shortage of qualified government auditors and accountants, really, all of us. We're not even covering governmental accounting in college anymore. The University of Texas just let that curriculum go, which is big. They used to have a
It's
GASB.
not on the CPA exam anymore, so that's probably why they're letting it go.
So what do you think what is the AICPA doing about it? Anything? Or are they just kinda
No,
what's
they're
happening?
aware. Mark Kozel is actually the new CEO of the AICPA. I actually just had a FINREC meeting last week. So FINREC is the Financial Reporting Executive Committee for the AICPA. And if you listen to any of his updates, they talk about the lack of government accountants and a lack of government auditors. There have been a couple of initiatives. NASAC has a program, I think it's with Rutgers University, if I'm not mistaken, where you can get a government accounting background, and there's scholarships for it. But I think there's a little bit of a PR effort that has to be done. And when they took government and nonprofit off of the CPA exam as a required element, when they went to disciplines versus having to do the core, I think it's a harder sell for universities, because it's not easy to find someone to teach that, let alone not the number of people who are going to do it.
Right. Yeah, you know Charles Hall.
I love Charles. His firm is a client of mine. I absolutely adore him.
He's the best. So he's doing a governmental accounting deep dive, and we're gonna offer it on our site whenever he gets that finished. And it's gonna be a big class. It's gonna be like a 20-hour course, but he's gonna walk through the financials and explain the ins and outs of governmental accounting, because the GASB has complicated it. Those are really difficult financial statements to read and use and audit and create, right?
It's
So
hard because their goal makes sense. They're trying to go to a principles-based approach. When you look at some of the projects they're working on, like revenue expense recognition, when they're looking at the balance sheet for things like SPIDAs and PPP and leases, the concept is there, right? The theory behind it. The problem is in the shortage, right? So when you don't have the people to begin with and you make it more complex, more principles based, more judgment, you have to have more skill. And when we have a shortage of people, that can be problematic. The GASB actually just released a really interesting report on the number of states and localities that don't even require or use GASB standards. There are a number of states
Right.
like Kansas and Indiana who do regulatory basis is accounting. Yeah, so there's a great great statistic out there on just usage of GASB because maybe it's just not working for those localities, and so
Right.
where
That's
they
right.
don't have the internal staff to do it.
Are you working with the GASB on the standards at all? Are you doing that?
No, I served on the nonprofit advisory committee for the FASB, and I serve on
Okay.
FAC. I've served on AICPA Council. I've served on the actually probably the closest I've gotten to GASB. I was a Zone 3 member of the Technical Issues Committee of the AICPA, and they actually respond on behalf of small firms to GASB proposals. And so we got to write our comment letter. Basically give feedback. Hey, small firms think this with respect to your proposals.
Yeah.
But I have good relationship with the GASB. Actually, I was in Chicago this summer for our AAA conference, and they actually, David Bean was inducted into the Hall of Fame for accountants, the Accounting Hall of Fame.
Oh,
So I got to see him, and they had a lot of GASB staffers there. Yeah, it was cool. It was Barry Melanson and David Bean, and then another gentleman who's a professor. I want to say out of California. I can't remember his name, but
okay.
big tax faculty, and then Mary Washington. So it was the coolest thing to watch. Obviously, Mary Washington is passed, but she was represented by her granddaughter, and it was a beautiful ceremony in Chicago, where she's from.
Yeah.
But yeah, to get to see the Accounting Hall of Fame. But David Bean, who's the technical director, forever known for his bow ties, had a bow tie on, was not surprised.
Cute.
Always loved it, but, like, Chad was there and a lot of people, and Alan was there, who's the current, technical director, so we had a good representation there. So, and one thing he talked about is the importance of governmental accounting and the work that has to be done there. So, I thought it was pretty interesting when David gave his speech, because governments are important, nonprofits are important.
They're half of the economy.
Exactly.
It's half of the economy, but it's not, yeah, but it's just not sexy to people. There's just a stigma around working in government, right?
You come out of school, you wanna work with the big public companies, right? That's what
Yeah.
people, I wanna work for Amazon, or I wanna work for, these big tech companies and do that.
Tesla.
But I think at the end of the day, like, working with nonprofits, it's rewarding to have a financial statement that reflects the work that's done and the contributions that were made and, governmental.
Right.
So to me, I think that if you're looking for rewarding, it's a little bit of a different perspective. But I will say, I had exactly 2 weeks of government and nonprofit accounting when I was in college. It was just 2 weeks of advanced accounting.
Yeah.
So we did mostly consolidation, and then the last 2 weeks were government and nonprofit. I learned everything on the job. And obviously, that's my area of specialization now, but it was all on the job training. So it can be done, even if they do remove it from the schools, which I'm not a huge fan of. But I do think it's important to remind people about the impressive work that's done by governments and by nonprofits. And if we didn't have them, it would be a very different world.
Yeah, and it's a very complex what a city does or what a state does is so involved and complex and fascinating, all the different services that they offer to their citizens.
That's why I love MD&A, the management discussion and analysis, because you don't have to
Yes.
be a CPA to understand what's happening in your government. So you should be
Right.
looking up your town or your city and looking at the MD&A because it's not written in technical jargon. Well, it's not supposed to be written
Right.
in technical jargon. It's supposed to be, easily accessible and, with charts and pictures and graphs so that where is your tax dollars going, what's coming in,
Yeah.
how is it coming in? And then how's it going out, right? I think informed citizens should be taking more attention to those types of items because the inner workings of a city or a town is actually super interesting.
Right. Right. Yeah. For example, the city of Austin, most of its revenue actually comes from the utilities. And that is a shock to the citizens. And that's why our utilities are so high, is because that's the cash cow for the city. And you can see that clearly if you look at the financial, if you look at the MD&A, which is not intimidating to me and you, but it is intimidating.
Maybe less intimidating the financial statements. The financial statements are intimidating. MD&A should not be intimidating.
Yeah. So, now why did you choose to go this path with your career? Like, what advice would you give new auditors around that? Why did you go this way?
I would just say try lots of things because I actually started my career working on the World Bank.
Oh,
I worked on a grower of hops. I worked on
whoa.
a number of things and then found what I really enjoyed. And I wasn't exposed to it in school, right? So my area of expertise is something I got from on the job training and being exposed to it and being passionate about it. And so to me, try lots of industries, try different things
Mhm.
because you might think you like something, but you might actually find out that you're really intrigued by something completely different that you haven't been exposed to. So try lots of things because you might surprise yourself on what you end up
Yeah,
deciding is your area to
yeah.
focus.
And you are a big volunteer with the AICPA and the FASB. How'd you start that journey? What are the benefits of that journey of being a volunteer?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I started locally. I think that's how most people should start, then, in the least scary version. So I started in my local chapter of the Virginia Society of CPAs. So I graduated from Georgetown and then I stayed in Northern Virginia. And the first thing I did was to join the VSCPA, and they had a Northern chapter. And I got involved and I did the Young Professionals Committee, and I started to work with that. And then I started to get more involved. And then I started working with the state. I served on the board of
Mm,
the board
mhm.
board for the VSCPA. And then probably the biggest change in my career and in my involvement was I signed up for the AICPA's Leadership Academy. And that's an amazing opportunity. They pick students, they pick younger people. I don't remember the age, the cutoff, but they give you this opportunity to do some really strong leadership work over a full week. You go, when I went, it was in Raleigh, Durham at the AICPA's headquarters, and then we had a hotel, and we all got together and we had amazing training. And then afterwards, they asked us, "What do you want to do to get involved?" And you tell them what your areas are. And that's when I did the technical issues committee, and that was probably the most rewarding I've ever done. Being able to respond on behalf of, on the real technical side, like writing comment letters. And then I got involved and got into council. So I served on ASCPA council from there. And I just think it's important to give back because you can't complain about things if you're not involved, right? So if you don't like standard setting, you need to tell them. I served on the
Right.
FASB's Not-for-Profit Advisory Committee, and we got to talk about the proposed standards and how they would impact nonprofits and give feedback and examples and really, be in the front end instead of complaining
Right.
about it after the fact.
Right.
Help lead the change on the front end. That's why I serve on FinRec now. We respond again to FASB, and they send a FASB rep to all of our meetings to listen to the conversation before we even respond.
Ooh.
So to me, you can have a huge impact, and your stories and your experiences matter. And I don't think there's enough small practitioners who participate because it's time consuming.
Ask you about that.
Well, I worked in national office, so I didn't have a big client base when I worked on the technical issues committee, and so I just was responsible for training and for actually following standard setters. It was part of my job, so it actually worked out really well. But it's hard for smaller organizations to do that. But even as a small business, all of our trainers are responsible for following standard setters and being involved and being on committees at the state and local level. Or like Alex right now is serving on AICPA Council. She's the next chair of the Colorado Society. So we want to be involved because one, you're influencing the future, but two, you also are always in the know, right? You know what's
Yeah.
coming before anyone else does. And so this way, your classes can't be more up to date than ours because we know it before it even happens. So, there's always that.
That's really good. How much time are you spending, you think, annually to be involved?
So FinRec's a little bit more work. We meet every other month, and so the meetings are about 4 hours a month. Sometimes they're 8, depending on what's happening. If we're going to get in person versus virtual, I think that's been a big change post COVID. Is a lot of our meetings are either 2 4-hour days or a 4-hour day. So every other month. But then it's the prep work. It's the reading the proposals and providing feedback on the comments and things like that. So it's not just the meetings; it's the preparation for the meetings. So I would say probably a good 8 hours a month that I'm devoting to that, which is not unreasonable. I would say that it's a pretty reasonable amount. And then there are some months that are a lot more simply because it's something that I'm passionate about. When we're doing the invitation to comment for the agenda consultation, for example, I was very passionate about that. Or when there was a nonprofit specific item, I really wanted to make sure that our voice was heard there. So I think that's really important. But when I started my career, I started on, a very, small, once a month, hour-long meeting. And I think that's also just as good. So start somewhere and build up.
I think it would be good if you would drill in on one of your technical issues and give the listeners a overview of how that works. So one of the issues that you were passionate about that was controversial, how long it took to work out, where it ended up. Do you mind doing that?
None of them have been finalized. Obviously, the agenda consultation was we submitted our comment letter. We haven't got
All right.
We haven't gotten a response from the FASB yet. They haven't done anything with it, because usually the standard setting process can actually take a good amount of time, right? From the time that they give you an exposure draft, they give you typically 60 days, but sometimes more. You can have 90 to 120-day comment periods. And then you respond to them, and then they have to take all that feedback. And right now, like the staff is reading that feedback, summarizing it, and then they'll present that at a meeting. And then that meeting will then be used to start the conversation. They'll have great sort of like summary and statistics, this number of people or this percentage of people. And then from there, they'll give, the FASB will say, okay, well, this is what we want to change, or these are the areas that we want to focus in. So a great example of a recent change that happened related to CECL, right? Everyone loves to talk about CECL, the current expected credit loss model that impacts for-profit entities and nonprofit organizations, predominantly in their trade receivables. The Private Company Council, whom I'm a huge fan of, I think they do great work, they identify that it was pretty cumbersome for smaller private entities and nonprofits to take a look at their accounts receivable, because accounts receivable was typically, for most private entities and most nonprofits, the largest account impacted by CECL, unless you're a bank and you have loans and things like that. For most private companies and most nonprofits, it was their accounts receivable. For nonprofits, pledges were excluded. They weren't in scope. So it was a pretty interesting issue because CECL required a forward-looking estimate. It required us to do a reasonable and supportable forecast. And the problem was AR is due in 30 days, maybe 60 days. A mortgage is due in 30 years, right? So a forecast makes sense. But to develop a forecast for the next 30 days, you're going to issue the financial statements before that forecast is up.
It'll all be liquidated by then anyway. Right.
Same thing. And then the second element was cash collections, right? We had, by the time you issue your financial statements and you're a private company or nonprofit, you're not issuing in 30 or 45 days. You're issuing in 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
maybe more. And so by that time, you've either collected it or not. And so the Private Company Council put out an exposure draft that the FASB backed, and basically proposed to get rid of that forward-looking concept, and allow you just to look at the current conditions, because what's going to change in the next 30 days, and allow you to consider cash collections. But when they proposed it, they excluded nonprofits with conduit debt. And so in our comment letter, we wrote back that nonprofits with conduit debt were much closer to private companies than they were public companies in this area because, again, it's AR. Right. And you look at the AR, the cash collections for AR in trade receivables, whether you have conduit debt or not, really wasn't a great divider. And so ultimately, when they issued ASU 2025-05, they made it for all nonprofits. So that's an example where the comment letters did change the scope, right? So originally only for a small portion of the nonprofits. Now all nonprofits are going to be in scope. And I participated in the AICPA comment letter for that. I participated in the FINREC comment letter for that. And that was something that, was very important to me, is that, that we were thinking about those nonprofits and whether conduit debt was really a differentiator for the impact of CECL on AR.
Wow. That little discussion that you just went through is going to blow people away with its technical nature. You have definitely found your place in the world, girl. That is amazing. Thank you for digesting, keeping on top of it, sharing what you know, keeping everybody in compliance, and keeping it real. You're great.
Well, thank you. I love what I do. I love getting to work with firms. I love working at state auditor's office because
Mhm.
it can be overwhelming, and they don't always have the time to digest the standards because they're busy. So we have the
Right.
time to digest the standards and then try to help them with it. So
Right.
I am blessed in what I get to do every single day.
Yeah, and you're amazing, and you love it. I love to read the Yellow Book. I love to interpret it. I love to share that stuff. And I do believe that I get paid for reading it, thinking about it, thinking how it applies, because you're right. People just do not have time to do that. That's the service we provide.
Absolutely.
And what's great is you're going that much further and you're actually impacting the standards by your volunteer work. So excellent work, Melissa. Very impressive.
Thanks so much. I really love what I do.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We appreciate your loyalty. Take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with all your audit allies. And don't miss out on Yellowbook-CPE's upcoming webinars. Because every superhero needs their training, and Yellowbook-CPE offers continuing education that's relevant, convenient, and as thrilling as the fight for justice. Until next time, audit on!